Hi, I'm Ian Whittaker, and welcome to the JCDecaux Digital Changemakers podcast. I've been invited to host this podcast to highlight the latest trends marketers should know about and interview senior leaders to ask the challenging questions we're all thinking. I want to showcase key pieces of research and insights that will inspire senior marketers to push the boundaries on their marketing strategies and become digital changemakers in their organizations. In previous episodes, it's become clear that measurement is a hot topic when it comes to traditional channels like digital out of home and broadcast video on demand being considered as truly digital channels. Today, I'm joined by Chris Felton, Director of Data and Insights at JCDecaux, who will give us an understanding of the progress that's been made in the area of digital measurement. Chris launched the JCDecaux UK Data Solutions team, who have built credible scientific methodologies to measure the results of out-of-home campaigns. Chris works with cutting-edge research techniques, partnering with eye-tracking specialist Lumen to embed new metrics such as attention and also neuroscience specialists to measure the science behind consumer behavior. Chris is an active member of the Media Research Group, or MRG committee, ensuring that work from the media insight community is shared across the industry. Chris, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely not at all. And it's great because, you've really been involved in sort of JCDecaux, just in terms of setting up the data solutions team there and really working sort of to push things forwards. I think what would be really, really good sort of start off with maybe is talk about, in terms of digital out of home, the capabilities and just how much things have changed. Because obviously with out of home, it's very, very interesting if you look at things. It is a relatively small part of advertisers' budgets at the moment. So maybe it doesn't get the attention of maybe some of the bigger platforms, but in terms of the strides that have been made over the past number of years, it's probably in some ways, it's probably been the most radical of any of the platforms.
Yes. So I guess what I would say is fundamentally out of home still does the job that is always done. However, what I would say is the advent and the advancement of data in digital out of home has helped us to ensure that brands can target a lot more accurately and can really focus on finding the people that they want and delivering a message to them, which is something that maybe digital out of home has not been associated with in the past, and it can definitely do those things now.
Okay. And from that standpoint, it'd be great maybe to talk through some of the sort of advances that have been made, who you're working with, on that as well, particularly when it comes to areas such as planning and measurement, so forth, because obviously for advertisers at the moment, that's absolutely key.
Yeah, so what I would say is one of the things that was also changed is the ability to use digital out of home as a creative canvas. So previously you might have had a paper advert which stays there for 2 weeks. Now you have digital, so you can change it and you can ensure that it says a message which is relevant to its location, the time, the temperature. All of these things make the advertising work harder. They make people look at it more. They make people look at it for longer, and we've got lots of evidence to kind of prove that.
And actually, maybe just talk through that. So can you give us a couple of examples of that in terms of going back to some of those points? Because again, if you think about that from a advertising medium standpoint, in a way, it's obviously not the Minority Report style of things, but for advertisers being able to actually target people at a particular time in sort of conjunction with what's happening in terms of the weather or what's happening in terms of location, that's a very, very powerful medium.
So we've done a lot of work with Lumen, the eye tracking specialists, and we've been able to prove that if you put a contextual message on a digital screen, people are more likely to look at it. Now, if you take that into the real world, we've all been celebrating the Lionesses winning over the last couple of days. Now, if on Monday morning there was a digital screen that talked about England winning, people are going to react to that differently because they've just seen that, they've just experienced it. And we've got evidence to prove that they're more likely to look at it and then go on to do something about it afterwards. And we're seeing more and more brands engage in this type of advertising. But what we'd like to see is more people do it and everyone do it because we feel it works better. We've got evidence to show that it works better. So we would like to welcome and invite people to come and do more of it.
And that leads on to the next question, actually. When you look at, what are some of the hot topics sort of at the moment, planning and measurement, often things that are mentioned. from the digital out of home standpoint, sort of what does digital out of home offers in terms of that? And then also as well, what are maybe some of the latest developments that are happening?
So what I would say is I'm lucky in my job in terms of data, because there is lots of data available at a location level. And at JCDecaux, we look to sell things at a location level. So for example, take somebody's postcode, for example. Your postcode will tell you a lot about you. Your neighborhood will have similar houses, they will have similar cars, they will go to similar shops. And ultimately, you'll have similar advertisers who want to reach these types of people. Now, we can build up a profile of people based on all of this data. And then we can use things like mobile phone data to understand where these people then travel, where they end up, and where they shop. And ultimately, producing this for advertisers will allow them to reach these types of people. So it's an exciting place to be in terms of the planning aspect. When it comes to measurement, out of home has always been difficult to measure. In the digital world, you can look at last click. Now, the difference with out of home, it's a very passively consumed media. It would be silly of us to suggest that you see a poster and then instantly you go and do something afterwards. That's not how it works. You might see an advert 10, 11 times over a 2-week period and then go on to buy. So what we are doing is we are trying to advance our measurement techniques.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, one thing that I think is quite interesting. I mean, the UK is one of the most advanced in terms of digital out of home, when it comes to the penetration of the market and so forth. I mean, from your sort of day-to-day role, do you discuss of what you see on on the data side with teams elsewhere? And would you say there's anything that's particularly noticeable about the UK market?
So at JCDecaux, we have a global data team who are based in France, and we speak with them all the time. What I would say is that in the UK, the digital out-of-home market is far more mature. We have more screens, and also I think we have more advertisers who want to use it in an interesting and engaging way. So I think we're quite lucky in that sense.
Okay. And when you look at it in terms of the amount of data that, let's say, you have compared with some other platforms, I mean, is that something that you think about, or are you really just more focused on what you can offer yourself?
I think it would be silly to look at us in an amount of data compared to some of the digital players. However, what we should do is we should look at where we are now compared to where we were 5 years ago, because absolutely at this point now we have way more data. We understand our customers and our consumers who are looking at our advertising way better than we ever have before. And it's my job to ensure that we deliver these messages to our customers.
And I think that's one of the things that's always been discussed with out of home, and particularly digital out of home, is there have been studies with Facebook, for example, showing the effect when you have Facebook and out of home working together. It's much more effective than if you have the two platforms working separately and so on. When you speak with advertisers about a multi-platform advertising strategy and where digital out of home fits into that, what are the key points that come across? What are the key things that you are saying to advertisers about that?
So we have two measurement strategies. The first measurement strategy is to isolate out of home. And the way you do that is you start with a small campaign. So you might run a small digital out of home campaign in a small location. And then you understand in that small location, what is the effect? Because it's much easier to measure things like sales, brand uplift when you're looking at a small area. Now, if you're able to then do that on a small scale and prove it to an advertiser, then hopefully what they might want to do from that is then do it on a national scale. Once you get to the national scale, then you go on to phase 2. Now, phase 2 is when you start looking at out of home within the multimedia mix. Now, in my opinion, I think there are better people qualified to measure multimedia. I work at JCDecaux and I would consider myself knowledgeable about out of home. And on those small scale tests, I think we are credible. What my advice for measuring multimedia would be to work with somebody, for example, Kantar. If you do that, then what we have done with Kantar is we've helped them improve the way that they measure out of home in their multimedia mix. And that's been a really successful outlook for us.
I think actually you preempted my next question, which is actually the advice that you would give to advertisers when looking at digital out of home and in a multi-platform strategy. how they should work it. I mean, apart from sort of some of the examples you mentioned there, is there anything else that you'd sort of advise advertisers to do?
I think a big part is creative. So it's a bit more towards the beginning. We have lots of tools where we look at creative. Quite often, because out of home is difficult to measure the outcome, it's very easy to say it didn't work. Sometimes you could say it doesn't work because the creative isn't quite right. So we would always advise, and at JCDecaux, we have 2 or 3 different types of tools to help advertisers test their creative. Test, test, test. Because if you get it right, the creative right, we're confident that the out of home will deliver because we have faith in the medium.
Okay. And I mean, one, if I ask you a final question, and again, don't feel as though you have to answer this because it might be a bit of a cheeky one from my standpoint. But in terms of digital out of home, I mean, do you think that in terms of what you have and its capabilities, that really what should be happening is you're taking, more and more share of digital ad budgets as opposed to just expanding out of home ad budgets?
I'm a big believer that digital out of home enhances other media. We've got lots of evidence to say that it's a very, very good primer. So if you have one creative on a mobile phone screen, that same creative can then go onto a digital out of home screen. The two things working together really do work together, and we've got lots of evidence to do that. So my suggestion would be, when you're thinking about your digital strategy, include digital out of home in that thought process, because the two things are very, very complementary and they do different things.
Chris, can you give me an example of how you've worked with an advertiser when you've looked in terms of digital out of home and sort of helping them with their strategy?
So I can give a couple actually. So firstly, I would like to talk about Hyperoptic. So Hyperoptic were a new brand to digital out of home. Traditionally, they'd done below the line advertising, and this was their first time going into digital out of home. So they came to JCDecaux to ask some advice. And what was great about this example is we were able to take them through a journey, which included, first of all, helping them test their creative. Now, the reason that we wanted to test their creative is we've done projects before. We had a project with Posterscope and Clear Channel called The Moments of Truth. And that proved that if you were to run contextual creative, more people would notice your advertising. So our advice to Hyperoptic would be to ensure that if you do an advert in London, you write the word London on it. If you do an advert in Edinburgh, you have the word Edinburgh in it. We were then able to work with Lumen to then test whether this creative did work, and it gave more attention. And then subsequently after this, they then delivered this in the real world across many of our screens. And we were able to then run an online survey to understand how the campaign had performed in terms of brand awareness and consideration.
Okay. That's great. Was there any, you were just about to give another example, but I don't know, maybe I'm...
Yeah, so another example that we have is with ASOS. Again, traditionally a brand that would be below the line and using digital advertising. They came to us again. It was their first time using digital out of home for a long while. And what was great about that is we were able to use our own data sets to help them plan their campaign. Then we were able to look at transactional data to understand whether the campaign had been successful. And we were then able to provide them with a full service of evaluation.
Okay. It sounds great. And obviously, there's plenty of other advertisers that you could talk about as well.
Yeah, so what I would say as well is in the example where we are working with agencies, we worked with PepsiCo, and that was when we were looking at their cross-media evaluation, and their agency was Kantar. And in this example, what we did is we provided Kantar with route data, which they'd never used before. And what that allowed them to do is to improve their out-of-home model so that it measured the out-of-home more effectively.
And that actually just leads on to another question as well. I mean, from your standpoint, in terms of agencies, sort of when it comes to understanding the capabilities of digital out of home, sort of where do you think the agencies are now? What do you think they get right? And maybe if you had to look at it, where perhaps more work needs to be done?
I think that out of home at the moment is probably considered as proximity. I have a store. and there is an advertisement close by, so I should do those two things. Now, that is not a bad strategy, because if, for example, you're McDonald's and you want somebody to buy a chicken sandwich, not a Big Mac, then an advert can absolutely do that in close proximity. What might be a better way to consider is actually engaging with people all the way through the week, so that when they're more likely to then go to McDonald's, and then of course they can make their decision while they're there. So I think thinking about out of home as a truly broadcast media that can then be targeted as well would be the right way for brands to think.
That's great. Chris, thanks very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you for joining me today. There is a lot of very interesting information there that I'm sure would be welcomed by brands considering expanding their digital footprint. We hope you enjoyed listening, and wherever you get your podcasts, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. For further resources, downloadable slides, and more information on all the topics covered in our podcasts, visit changemakers.jcdecaux.co.uk. You'll also find my short e-learning series there on how to speak the language of the CFO on the JCDecaux Digital Academy. Thanks for joining, and see you next time. We hope you enjoyed listening, and wherever you get your podcasts, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. For further resources, downloadable slides, and more information on all the topics covered in our podcasts, visit changemakers.jcdecaux.co.uk. You'll also find my short e-learning series there on how to speak the language of the CFO on the JCDecaux Digital Academy. Thanks for joining, and see you next time.